Welcome to Music and Protest, a panel discussion and virtual program of the Otorino Center for the Arts in partnership with Cuatro Puntos Ensemble, the 2020-2021 Artist in Residence. My name is Steve Rader Ginsburg, and I'm the director of the Otorino Center for the Arts and Humanities at the University of St. Joseph. This program was made possible by those of you who chose to donate, and thank you, and to the National Endowment for the Humanities. If you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube, we invite you at this time to join us in our digital concert hall. Here you can engage with us and view our extensive program notes. To get to the digital concert hall, visit otorino.usj.edu and complete the free registration for this event. You will then receive a link that will take you to the digital concert hall. If you have already registered, please use the link found in your email from the Otorino Center. At the Otorino Center for the Arts and Humanities, we believe that one of the roles of the arts is to make the invisible visible. We also believe that it is not the responsibilities of those who have been made invisible to remind us that they are still here. Let's take the space and the time to acknowledge the ground on which the Otorino Center is physically located and where I now stand. This is the traditional lands and the meeting grounds of the Mohegan, Pequot, Scatachok, Golden Hill Puget, Nipmuc, Lenape, and all the unrecognized Algonquin people of this area. We honor their ancestors past, present, and future, and recognize their continued existence and contributions to society. And I'm honored today to be moderating and facilitating this exciting panel in which we will discuss historic, contemporary, national, and international ways in which musicians work with their talents to imagine a more just and equitable future. If you have thoughts, comments, or questions for the panelists, take the time to make those comments online and we will do our best to respond. I'll now introduce the panelists, and they will each present their work. Followed by that, we'll have discussion. Today's panelists are Kenneth Long, PhD and Professor of History and Political Science at the University of St. Joseph in Connecticut. He is author of 2 books and numerous articles on American politics, foreign policy, international relations, and political theory. He was the visiting Fulbright professor at Johns Kepler University in Linz, Austria, and concurrence researcher at Linnaeus University in Växjö, Sweden. He's lectured at various universities in Austria, China, and Sweden. Byron O. Yong and Aaron Jaffaris created Stuck Elevator and Belonging, aka Trigger. Current projects include Activist Songbook. Other projects include Kidnapping Water, Bottled Operas, and Surrender, a Tai Chi cantata, commissioned by the Esoterics. Honors include awards from the Bay Area Theater Critics Circle, Creative Capital, Edgerton Foundation, NEFA's National Theater Project, and Time Warner Foundation. Young is based in San Francisco and Jaffaris is in New Haven. Dr. Allan Ballinger is a cellist with the Cuatro Puntos Ensemble, dedicated to intercultural dialogue and universal access through the performance, writing, and teaching of music. He is also an assistant professor of history at Gateway Community College in New Haven, Connecticut, both activities reflecting his lifelong commitment to empowering the disenfranchised and underserved in our society. Ameed Mokdad, born in 1989 in Baghdad, graduated from the University of Mosul in 2013. He attended Agriculture and Forestry College, has lived in the city of Mosul in the north of Iraq from 2003 until after the ISIS occupation. Ameed started learning and making music in 2009. He has been composing music for films and theater plays since 2014. He has also been acting and directing experimental theater plays since 2017. And in 2019, Ameed founded the Light Orchestra in the city of Mosul. Ameed composed The Curve, a music album recorded by Cuatro Puntos Ensemble. The music was written in the city of Mosul under ISIS occupation. Ameed also has been creating street performances as a musician and dancer since 2017 throughout Iraq. He is also a member of the Tartib Baghdad Contemporary Arts Institute since 2017. Thank you, panelists, for being here today. I'm looking forward to starting our music and protest panel discussion and dialogue. Professor Long, if you could give us some opening remarks.
Teach a course called Political Themes in Modern American Music, and it's probably the principal reason why I'm here to talk to you a little bit and introduce you to the wonderful musicians with us today. When I teach that course, I use two texts, one of which argues that music has no discernible effect whatsoever on political outcomes. And the other, which suggests that it obviously has tremendous effect on those outcomes. There's no consensus among scholars, which is correct. But I'm apt to believe the latter, not necessarily that it's obvious, but that it is real. And I suppose I have only to think of soldiers who bring at least a drummer into battle. Soldiers are not known for bringing a lot of extraneous things into battle. That they're pricking music to be among the things that are necessary suggests that at least the military thinks that there's some palpable effect to music and political outcomes. I will say that there probably is consensus that to be effective, the music itself has to be good. We could overlay the best lyrics in the world on top of a song that doesn't amount to much, and it probably wouldn't make much of a difference. So lyrics are important in many pieces and maybe not necessary in others. But if we have a musical greatness of some sort to the song, we have hope of having some effect of all sorts. So whether it's just feeling or whether it's political feeling, which is what interests me most and I think what interests our panel discussion today. I want to just briefly mention 4 songs. These are not necessarily the best songs in the world. But each sort of has its effect in a somewhat different manner. So let's start with Billie Holiday and her big hit, Strange Fruit, which evokes the image of a lynching. And when she performed that song in 1939, audiences just sat there stunned. They didn't know what to do, if they should applaud, or if they should move. Some people walked out. They were used to thinking of music as something that just entertained, and this was obviously not so lighthearted and not so entertaining, but it was thought-provoking in conjuring up that kind of imagery. So music can stun people, and that can be important in a political endeavor. John Lennon, Give Peace a Chance, much later, 1969. The work starts out with a lot of references to trendy news of the day, and then sort of settles in on the same words over and over and over again, where it's, probably what all you remember from the song is all we are saying is give peace a chance. And that's a piece of music that engages in powerful sloganeering and is trying to simply say as elegantly and briefly as possible what the political message is. And it starts out with, all we are saying is this. All we are saying is give peace a chance, and inviting the listener to object to the idea of giving peace a chance, which is, in the view of John Lennon, a pretty difficult endeavor, which is why he puts it exactly that way. So politicking music can be sloganeering, and that can be incredibly influential to launch and sustain movements. Helen Reddy, late Helen Reddy, recently died. 1972, she performed I Am Woman. And the key lyrics there, I am strong, I am invincible. And essentially this was a message from a woman to women everywhere saying, don't believe you're weak, you are not, you're incredibly powerful. We are powerful. And the notion of empowerment is critical to political movements. You can't succeed unless you have some faith that you have some ability to do so. And anything that is empowering, and music can evoke a feeling of power quite effectively, that can be critically important. If we want to combine the last two, President Obama kind of borrowed from this a little bit with his slogan, yes, we can. Sort of a different way of phrasing, we have power, that we can do something about the world and make it better. And lastly, sort of a fourth type of being influential, I would mention Bob Dylan and Hurricane. I'm not sure that's the best Bob Dylan song of all time. There's just too many good contenders for that one. But it is intriguing that Bob Dylan does something in that song that is really, really hard to do. He educates his audience with the song. It is not a sloganeering song. It is not one that particularly stuns the audience. It is not one that says you're powerful, but is one that says, hey, I've got a story to tell about this guy who was framed by the police and prosecutors, and this is what happened to him. Here are the details, and you'll see how they played out, and you'll know what you'll feel at the end of that story. So music can be storytelling, literally narrative style storytelling that informs an audience something that they might not know otherwise. And maybe out of all these four songs, the one that you could most strongly make a case for saying, oh, obviously music can be powerful, is this last one, because Hurricane Carter was released from prison. It took a lot of years, but it's hard to imagine that he ever would have had enough attention to his cause to be released had it not been for this song and its massive appeal to huge numbers of people around the world, and especially in the United States. So those are some some ways in which we can hang our hat on the issues before us today and think a good bit about ways in which music evokes feeling, information, stuns, and inspires people to participate in a protest or in any political endeavor. And I'll be looking forward to chatting with our fellow panelists about some of these things and about their music. It'll be fun to learn about what they're performing. So by way of an introduction to our next speakers, let me say a little bit about the Activist Songbook. It was co-created by Byron Yong and Aaron Jaffaris. It is a process-oriented work that begins with interviews of Asian American, Asian immigrant, and Asian refugee organizers. Working with those interviewed, composer Byron Yong and writer Aaron Jaffaris create material for a songbook to gather individuals and collectives to energize efforts towards counteracting racism and hate crimes. The project results in a collection of 53 songs and raps, initially prompted by the racially motivated murder of Vincent Chin, as well as organizing movements towards justice.
Hello, I'm Byron Yong.
Hi, I'm Aaron Jaffaris.
And we have some slides to share. As the slides go, we'd like to thank all the hosts, panelists, and audience here who are with us today. So I'm going to speak, next slide. I'm going to speak about the context, and Aaron is going to speak about guiding ideas for this project. Next slide. As Ken mentioned, this was prompted by the murder of Vincent Chin in 1982 on his bachelor night, where he was beaten to death by two out-of-work white auto workers in Detroit. One of the people who became an activist was his mom, Lily Chin. And there's a quote from Helen Zia, who's one of the people we interviewed as part of this. Next slide. So we were interested in this project because one thing that happened after Vincent Chin's murder was that a national organizing movement happened that brought together many Asian Americans as well as other people. And this was recognized as a hate crime, even though the two murderers were only had to pay a fine of $3,000. So this is April 1983, and we're going to fast forward to the next slide, which is March 19th, 2020, when the outgoing president of the United States, you can see here, he replaced coronavirus with the word Chinese. Next slide. So that the context for Activist Songbook is to counteract hate and to energize movements. And here's a quote from Fox News pretty recently, last month. 1 in 4 young Asian Americans personally experienced anti-Asian hate amid the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is research done by the Stop Asian American Pacific Islander Hate Youth Campaign. Next slide. So there are a number of performers, organizers, who are standing up against the xenophobia. One of the performers who has done this is Diane Phelan, who's created this Racism is a Virus campaign. Next slide. we go into the guiding context with Aaron.
Thanks, Byron. So yeah, Activist Songbook is a series of 53 songs and raps to counteract hate and energize movements. Next slide. The 53 are made up of 26 rally songs, 26 narrative songs, and 1 infinite song. The narrative songs are created from the stories of the Asian American activists around the country who we interview. And then the rally songs actually emerge from those narrative songs. So we're also asking those same activists, what songs does your movement need now? And then we turn the narrative songs chorus into a rally song that can be easily taught to people on the street, in a movement, in a meeting. And those 26 rally songs are added to the 26 narrative songs. And then we have 1 infinite song, which is an invitation or a template to other people to create their own songs in response to Activist Songbook. Activist Songbook is also drawing on these various songbooks that you see listed here throughout our country's more recent history. And then next slide. And then also some older history, which Byron will talk about.
Yeah, so these are, as a musician who is trained in classical European music, I was really interested in the 14th through 16th century in Europe, where notation, as we know it, Western notation was beginning to be formed. And there were a lot of ideas also that musically come into Activist Songbook. So this idea of a cantus firmus, or a single melody, this idea of multiple voices singing at the same time, the idea of different rhythms happening at the same time, and the idea of a template or a treatise. So next slide.
The basic ideas that we're trying to work with in Activist Songbook are that it be long-lasting and responsive, that there's little to no barrier to entry to participation, and that there's multimodal participation, so various ways of engaging. So next slide. We're actually going to try to do a little bit of that right now, because we've found that the people most affected by the music that we're creating, most moved by it, are us and the other people who are creating it. And so we've tried to expand the participation in Activist Songbook more than any of our other projects. Next slide. So I'm going to invite all of you who are watching right now, including the other panelists and the people who are watching this, to ask yourself this question right now. How are you surviving or resisting now? And you can type an answer into the chat or the comments wherever you are. Just one way that you are surviving now, or one way that you are resisting now. Just take a moment.
So as those comments come in, if Kevin could type them into the screen, and if you could also go to the next slide. So Aaron mentioned the narrative songs and the rally songs. So rally songs are meant to be taught outdoors within 10 minutes, to be used right away by a group of people, singers, non-singers alike. So I'm showing an excerpt from the score of the next song you're going to hear, and it's from a song called Survival is Resistance. So you can see some of the things I mentioned, these different melodic motifs that can overlap. So so as you're reading the comments, as you're typing in comments, as you're thinking about how you survive and resist during these times, you can also be singing along with me, embodying the music. So, and this can be in any rhythm, right? You notice that the notes don't have stems. So it can be a step higher. And then the top line is, and all of those overlap. And this NG actually comes from the word song, which you'll hear sung. And Diane Phelan, who I showed a slide of earlier with The Racism is a Virus, she's actually the soloist. She's singing a narrative song from Kao Ku, who you also saw a photo of when we did a workshop in Philadelphia. We also interviewed her. She's a Hmong refugee. And in the song, they are all in the song. And if you want to sing along, as you're thinking about ways you survive and resist during these times, you can. So it's now the video.
This country tries to wash our blood from its hands and teeth. It tries to wash our brains clean of culture and belief. But my cousins all know, who we are is never wrong. And before we passed on, we'll pass on who we are in song.
Where I'm from, the earth and water were swallowed up or slaughtered by money or guns, till the only seeds my family planted were the bodies of daughters and sons. The country washed my family's blood from its hands and teeth, and tried to wash the brains clean of culture and belief. But my grandparents knew who they were was never wrong, and before they passed on who they were in song. When a country tries to crush us, deny our existence, music is survival, and our survival is resistance. Survival is resistance. Resistance, the crater of the bomb we turn into a pond to fish in. Resistance, old clothes so each new child fits in. Resistance, old songs we know our torn hearts are stitched in. When we leave home for new lands in the distance, we move on to survive. Our survival is resistance. Here our food and water run dry, and the cost of life is so high, and prisons overflow with rivers of those whose only crime is having no other place to go. This country tries to wash our blood from its hands and teeth. It tries to wash our brains clean of culture and belief. But my cousins all know who we are is never wrong, and before we pass on, we'll pass on who we are in song. When a country tries to crush us, deny our existence, music is survival, and our survival is resistance. Survival is resistance. Resistance, the tiny patch of dirt we turn into our kitchen garden. Resistance, the food and seeds we share when times harden. Resistance, the songs we hold and throw our pardon. When we sing existence, every word, every child's arrival is resistance. Now my children are resisting. They plant bulbs and wild visions. Each seed is like a fist bursting up through earth and water, crying, we exist, we resist. And my children will know who they are is never wrong. And before I pass on, I'll pass on who we are in song. When a country tries to crush us, deny our existence, music is survival, and our survival is resistance. Survival is resistance. Resistance. Survival is resistance. Resistance. Survival is resistance.
thanks so much for passing it on to Allan.
Well, thank you, Byron and Aaron. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to be part of such an important discussion, and that certainly that video certainly illustrates the point. I've followed the dual paths of history and music throughout my life, mirroring my parents. My dad was a high school history teacher. My mother, a church choir director and organist. As a cellist with Cuatro Puntos, for those of you who maybe aren't aware, Cuatro Puntos, or 4 points in Spanish, is a nonprofit organization that activates music as a pragmatic and universally accessible stimulus for social change, cultural awareness, and empowerment of the underserved. We seek to connect Connecticut residents with artists around the world by curating guest artists both in person and virtually, emphasizing those who are cultural keepers of threatened art forms or who are doing genuine work to serve others. In addition to the Cuatro Puntos Ensemble and educational outreach to schools throughout New England, the crowning achievement of Cuatro Puntos is our partnership with Hartford's Christ Church Cathedral, titled Music Moves Connecticut. It's a participatory music program building community and a safe space for expression among those living on the streets, in shelters, and in various states of housing insecurity around the state. Now, throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, musicians have used their voice to speak out against war and injustice. When considering the topic of music and protest, as a cellist, I think of Pablo Casal's self-imposed exile to protest the fascist regime of Francisco Franco. In fact, he put his career on hold to aid refugees fleeing that country. Or Mstislav Rostropovich, the Russian cellist facing restrictions on his artistic freedom in the Soviet Union because he welcomed the Soviet dissident writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn into his home when the latter was under house arrest. Many Soviet-era artists imbued their music with hidden meanings as a way of protesting the censorship of the regime. I think of Dmitri Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony. It was composed in 1937 at the height of Stalin's purges. He'd been rebuked the year before, attacked publicly in Pravda. And so he labeled the Fifth Symphony a Soviet artist's practical, creative response to justified criticism. Many in the audience actually openly wept at its premiere, in the composer's own words, because they understood what was happening around them, and they understood what the Fifth was really about. And that was the immense suffering of the Soviet people under Joseph Stalin. Even in the 1950s, after the thaw under Nikita Khrushchev, after Stalin's death, still restrictive conditions continued within Soviet art world and Soviet conservatories. Composers were restricted on publishing or producing sacred music or music that used 20th century compositional techniques, such as serialism, which is 12-tone music, aleatory or chant music, or collage techniques. Yet despite the official bans on serialism, the early 1960s saw young Soviet composers experiment with 12-tone composition. Arvo Pärt wrote his Necrologue in 1960 as one of the earliest serial works of the period, and it was officially condemned by the Soviet press. Alfred Schnittke's first string quartet, also a 12-tone composition, published in 1966, that Cuatro Puntos will be performing in our concert on Sunday, can be seen as a direct musical protest against the censorship of Soviet authorities. Now, Arvo Pärt's mature style was preceded by an 8-year period of relative creative silence, apparently in response to the Soviet authorities' official condemnation of his sacred work Credo in 1968. They accused him of political defiance, and the work was banned from performance in the Soviet Union for the next decade. When he returned to composition in 1976, he first published only instrumental pieces that he sought to imbue with religious and spiritual meaning. During that period of musical silence, he undertook a study of medieval and early Renaissance music that culminated in the development of his style of composition called tintinnabulation. Parrott explained that the melodic voice in his compositions always signified the subjective world, the daily egoistic world of life and life of sin and suffering. The tintinnabuli voice or harmonic voice is the objective realm in forgiveness. So this can be likened to the dualism of body and spirit, earth and heaven. But the two voices, in his view, are really a single entity. So again, in response to the censorship of his work Credo, he then infused his instrumental compositions with hidden meaning as an act of protest against that censorship. Now, most of you are probably familiar, speaking of cellists, with Yo-Yo Ma's Silk Road project, championing intercultural collaboration and dialogue. Not as well known, but of similar artistic stature, I believe, is the contemporary violinist and composer Jessie Montgomery. A graduate of Juilliard since 1999, Jessie has been affiliated with the Sphinx organization, which supports young African-American and Latinx string players, and she currently serves as its composer in residence. The New York Philharmonic has selected Ms. Montgomery as one of their featured composers for Project 19, celebrating the centennial of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which granted equal voting rights to women in the United States. Some of her other works to come soon are a nonette inspired by the Great Migration, when 6 million African Americans in the South relocated to urban areas in the North and West. She seeks to raise cultural awareness in her music by infusing it with African rhythms and with what she describes as the inflection of African American spirituals. So here's an excerpt from her composition, Voodoo Dolls, which Cuatro Puntos will be performing in our concert on Sunday. Finally, music has often been a vehicle for protesting war. as I'm sure the Activist Songbook illustrates very vividly. I think of the works of Jewish composers in the Nazi concentration camps, many of whom were murdered there, such as Gideon Klein, Hans Krasse, and Ilse Weber, whose music has been recovered and preserved for posterity. I want to introduce now our colleague, Ameed Mokdad from Iraq, who was trapped in hiding by ISIS for nearly 2 years in his hometown of Mosul, and wrote a tremendous amount of extremely powerful music as his reaction to and response to the war there. Ameed?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for the great introduction, Allan, and thank for all the colleagues here, the panelists, and the ones who are watching from everywhere in the world. So what you saw right now, it's one of the videos that I just made after the liberation of the city of Mosul, after the occupation of ISIS, and that was my way to protest. Like all the hospitals basically in the city of Mosul were destroyed, and everybody was happy. I mean, in the capital in Baghdad, and everybody like the military, the army, there celebrating with the liberation of the city of Mosul. So my argue was it's not a city any longer, and because the principles to have a city, that you have at least to have the hospitals, schools, colleges, and for me culture and art. So the fundamental things like the hospitals were destroyed, and everybody was happy that they liberated this city from ISIS. Basically, the city were destroyed even much before, worse than before, even when ISIS was occupying the city. So the music for me, after, I mean, as Steve was introducing me, I started music when I was 20 years old in 2009. And after 10 years of dreaming, because I dreamed to be a musician and composer when I was 10 years old, but I couldn't even think or dream to touch an instrument. After 10 years of thinking, I just discovered that I'm living in a big propaganda, big crazy politics, which is leading us as humans, also as the tools to wars. And everybody know, like Iraq have been involved with so many wars, and we didn't finish till now. So I just realized that how much time do I need to realize or to get to my dream, or why we didn't have music. I mean, music was right, like very weirdly hidden in the community. So like it's not really like, for instance, like the beginning of when the TV channel starts in Iraq, basically they were putting the videos from the war. So they said because we don't want to forget. So why? So as a kid, like, we were waiting until the cartoons start after these videos. So they were putting this as a way to brainwash us. So we end up with a big whole generation ready to involve with army, to involve with any kind of violence, and I mean be involved with wars, because this is what we were watching before the cartoons. in the TV channels, before 2003. And later, nothing really changed, become very chaotic. So music for me was always a way to protest. And as I told you, I discovered that I need 10 years just to realize that I have to follow a dream, a 10 years old dream, and I started the music at 20. So that makes me go to streets and perform in public spaces, create a lot of interaction projects, artistic projects, to separate art that doesn't have really a wide platform in my country. And in the music, you can just make search, like in the Arab world and in the Middle Eastern world, like so many famous musicians. The most famous musicians in the Arabic world were from Baghdad and from Iraq. So and now we have still some icons, but it's not really widely everywhere. So I discovered that because I believe, and that was the effect on me, music have a really magical effect on brain, on people, that's change me. As it changed me, it will change people. And we don't have really platforms like concerts. Nobody care about concerts or concert hall or even theater. They don't even really support it because they took us to the violence side. This is the propaganda and the policy and the so many we can say periods and eras in the Iraqi history, the modern Iraqi history. So that's what makes me again decide to play in streets and bring music and art to the people in the streets, because the street is, for me, is the biggest platform, and all the streets are connected, and it's the biggest stage. And in this way, I can really reach people, and basically government and all the politics, well, they will not think about me that I have to stop or something. I have so many problems when I play music or when I perform as an actor or artist or a tap dancer or whatever I do, and especially with Tarkib, our contemporary art center, we have problems from police officers. What are you doing? But they don't really go in deep and know how it's effective. Like they don't really understand, and this is good, because they don't believe that we are trying to make a big change through this. So we will play a video from my last artwork in Tarkib Contemporary Art Festival, the 6th version of it, and you can watch our episodes. Today we published the 5th one. My artwork was the first one. So I will share with you propaganda from Tarkib Baghdad.
Number 1. Propaganda. Ameed Mokdad. The prelude of this year's festival is Propaganda by Ameed Mokdad. Once, Amin and me were discovering the abandoned city at the entrance of the Sindibad Park. We were searching for a place for the festival. He guided me to an open space and surprised me with the idea to build a large-scale harp on which the visitors can play. I looked at him and says, okay, why not? Propaganda is not a large-scale harp, but the harp works with strings. Propaganda works with strings. A string gives a tune, and it is always a person who gives the string a tune. Imagine you are one of the strings of a harp. Which tune are you, and who gives you your tune? You or someone else?
فكل واحد بيكم خلي يفكر بشغلة هسه ويشوف شنو أو كم خيط أكو بظهره أو شنو البروباغندا اللي هو دا يمشي عليها حياته. ممكن تكون السياسة مال الشركة اللي يشتغل بيها، ممكن تكون سياسة الجماعة اللي هو ينتمي لها ذات الوقت.
البروباغندا العادات والتقاليد وتحكم الأهل بيك بالشخص كان.
حلو. هاي بروباغندا واسعة
جدا جدا واسعة.
بروباغندا الشغل، انه انت يعني مثلا هاي شغلي، انه باي وقت مهما كان عندك انت لازم اذا صارت فلان شغل لازم تروح انت، مهما كنت تسوي، مهما كنت تخيل روحك انك حر او تسوي الشغلات اللي تحبها، من يجي هذا الشغل فانت لازم تروح.
تحس انك هذا خيط اللي يتحكم.
بالضبط.
او الفكره الاساسيه هي من البدايه انه هو المجتمع يبقى يدفع بيك على انه انت لازم تشتغل، على انه انت لا صار عمرك 26 سنه لازم تتزوج. جبنا وتر
Okay, they will continue until tomorrow. Yeah, so that was the propaganda artwork from Turkey Baghdad Contemporary Art Festival, and I think I can really call for everybody to come.
Well, thank you, Ameed. Thank you, Allan. Thank you, Byron. And thank you, Aaron and Ken, for bringing your work. It's so diverse. It spans so much time. It spans so much geography. And it seems it's so clear that, you know, we can't as people get motivated and get our energy and get focused and get out in our community really without some sort of something that's connecting us. When we listen to that violin or we hear those lyrics, it really does bring us together so much with a common connection, common morals, common vision. And I'm really curious, in you doing this work and thinking about this work as deeply as you do and being motivated to do this, how are you responding to each other and what you've shared in this moment? And I'm wondering, Ken, if you could start us off, since you gave that awesome context and then were able to soak in what everybody shared.
Be happy to start us off, although you're picking on the non-musician. You know, those who can do, those who can't teach or talk about it. So, as a non-musician among us, I'm intrigued by just, you know, something we saw in each of the presentations, you know, starting with Puntos and the notion of survival as resistance. Even beyond that, I mean, the very act of making music is something that involves more than just speaking. It involves speaking out. So I'm intrigued by that. I think maybe music has an intrinsic power because it's vocal. Whether it's, you know, the human voice or instrumental, it's all vocal and it all involves speaking out, and thus has the capacity to be full of resistance. Whether it's a piece of music in Soviet Russia that everyone knows what it's really about, regardless of the title, and the very title is sort of in some ways laughable, and a critique of being forced to call it something like this, or whether it's putting together a performance in which people are talking about merely survival as an act of resistance, but the very act that they're singing it is powerful. and more than just survival, or whether it's standing on a street in Mosul around wreckage, and sort of the scenery itself evokes something that that the music, the violin, is just sort of, pulling out of the air and pushing into the air in its power of expression. I'm intrigued. I don't know if the musicians, you have another take on this, and maybe mine is sort of a clearly non-musical take. But I think there's the intrinsic act of making music as a speech act, even beyond mere words, is something that gives us this universal appeal, particularly when the setting is so harsh. So if you're suffering oppression in one way or another, and you don't just, say, I'm still here, which itself takes some courage, but you're actually more like, I'm here. I got to be on screen here. The music is putting the fist up. You don't have to put your actual fist up. The music is doing it just because it is expressive. I'd be curious to see what people think of that take on it.
Thank you. What do others have, removed or connected by seeing the others' artworks trigger a memory for you, or call you, center you with your action that you're working on now?
So I think to pick up on what Ken said, I feel like one difference between like raising a fist or even shouting really loudly, "I am here," and the act of making music as protest is that that word making or the creating. So it's literally creating something new. It's creative and generative in a way that if you are in a environment like Amin showed us of destruction, of the opposite of generation, of the opposite of creativity, then the juxtaposition of something that is creating this new thing, this beauty, I think is even more powerful than in some ways than shouting or raising a fist. So yeah, I just wanted to jump on what you were saying with that, Ken, and then also to ask a question. I know other people might want to respond to Ken's question or invitation, but I wanted to ask one of my own for at some point, if especially for you, I mean, you talked about the way in which music can move. I can't remember the words you used, but can move you or another person, move their mind, move their heart, and I'm wondering what you or other people have seen as the difference or similarity between when, for example, someone is simply listening to a piece of music that you have created and you are performing, versus someone who's playing, like an instrumentalist who's playing, like someone from Cuatro Puntos, playing something that you've performed, versus the video that you showed us where people are actually like creating, kind of involved in the generation of the music itself by playing these heartstrings that are attached to them. Have you witnessed a difference in the way that people are impacted on those three different levels?
I mean, I will tell you a very short version of a very interesting story I had. Once, one of the neighbors where I used to live in Mosul tells me like his friend want to involve with ISIS, and he asked me to talk with this person, with his friend, to convince him not to involve with ISIS. And I was shocked, like, really? Are you serious? How come I can talk with him? If he will see me or see my house with all the instruments there. He will simply make a call or bring ices, and they will. Yeah, I mean, like so shitty things could happen. I could simply die. So I was thinking, like, I was alone at home. My family was away in Baghdad, and I was really frustrated, like really crazy situation. But I just remember like how music affected on me as a person, and how made me survive among all what's happening in the streets, killing really crazy things. But I was creating my own space, my own freedom, putting art everywhere on the walls, music, and I wrote The Curve, which is the album with what Cuatro Puntos played. So I was thinking, no, I have to make a risk. And I said, after 1 week of thinking, I felt guilty. So I said, ask him to come and we will try something. So we're talking about theory, philosophy, religion, and everything, and I couldn't do anything. He was literally want to be an ISIS member. And I could understand why, because of so many bad history we have in books. But I said, okay, let's listen to music. So I started to play on the violin. I taught his friend a guitar. So he was playing a guitar. And I said, can you play music? He said, you what? I don't even know how to write well or read well. So I just give him a def, like an instrument. It's a percussion instrument and famous in Middle East. And I said, start to play. So he was starting playing with us, and I saw how it's affecting on him. This person ended up coming every day to my house to listen to music and to try instruments, and he could after 6 months escape from the city, get married and have a nice job, and he stopped. He didn't think about this. So that was a new proof of me each day that how it's effective. So it's effective as a face to face, or as a, like, let's say, interaction, like what I did in propaganda. When people try or come to music and play it, and when people listen to it, so it's really effective in so many levels. Even though, like, the musicians in Iraq who had no hope, or the people, normal people, my students in light orchestra, when they saw Cuatro Puntos playing my own music, what I composed, in the same situation when they were living in Mosul under ISIS, they were full of hope, changed them a lot. And that's another level of affecting, like not only listening to the music, but listening to the story, or making the music, or playing the music. So it's really wide, and I cannot really summarize it short, and because it's super effective, magical. I mean, what I saw in the video, and when you talk, and Byron, about your project, it's inspiring me a lot in so many levels. Even I think some levels you didn't mean, like you just made something and you have a perspective in so many ways, but it inspired me in a really crazy way, and which is, this is, I mean, the magic of music. So thank you. I will do.
I mean, the idea of the harp. I had this association, and I think Kevin can bring up the picture of Augusta Savage, was an African American sculptor during the Harlem Renaissance, and she sculpted this. It's called "Lift Every Voice and Sing," but it's a human harp. And this is commissioned for the New York World's Fair. I forget the exact year, the 20s or 30s. But you can see the size of this. Look, these are workers surrounding here. And so the idea of course, "Lift Every Voice and Sing" is sometimes been called the Negro National Anthem. It speaks about the suffering of the African American people and the hope for the future. And tragically, the sculpture was just destroyed after the World's Fair ended. But again, just your harp and its sort of commentary on society. I made that association. I thought it was something worthwhile sharing.
I want to share with the audience who's watching on the concert page that there is a way to join this conversation. There's a button that says Enter Conversation Live. If you'd like to bring a question in, make a comment, make an observation, please hit that and we'll get you going, or write the comment. Looks like Ameen's internet might have been unstable. He might have popped out. Maybe we'll see him come back. Byron, I would like to see if you have any thoughts, questions, or observations to share.
Cool. Yeah. Thinking about what people have talked about, especially just with Ken and Aaron, this like function of music versus speaking out. And there's this Canadian composer, Armory Schaefer, who also is one of the founders of acoustic ecology. And he noted that we have eyelids. We can close our eyes. We can turn away, but we don't have earlids. And so, right, if
I love that.
If there's it's intentional, because if there's danger around the corner, we need to be able to hear it. And yet music is oftentimes the opposite of danger. It was interesting because Ken mentioned, military music, which is vastly understudied, right? Because music usually is a way to bring people together. And I love what Ameed said about how all the streets are connected, because it makes me definitely imagine when you hear, let's say we're listening and all of a sudden we hear this sound, sounds like a violin, and we go closer to a place that we know was bombed, a hospital, and then all of a sudden we hear this music. It brings us there, and I'm so excited by this idea of play and how Ameed is bringing people to, like, the next step from listening is participating and figuring out how can we make music together. So those are some of the thoughts I have.
I love that. No earlids. I can never forget that. It's such a strong visual image, and also how powerfully pervasive the sounds don't stop. We shut our eyes, but we never stop listening.
And I'll offer another term that Armory Schaefer coined, ear witness, right? We often have eyewitnesses, and he's like, there are ear witnesses as well. So, I think one of the things that's happened during the pandemic and shelter in place is there have been studies how bird sounds are reappearing around the world.
Mm-hmm. The work has just been, it's powerful because, art is powerful. And what you all have shared is so moving. And when we see it and when we hear it, it's not just singular. We sort of get that connection. We see each other. So I'm wondering if, as artists and musicians who need to work and collaborate with each other, has there been some breakthroughs for you since COVID, since quarantine? Has anything positive in a way of your art process come out? Have you been able to connect in a way that has moved you towards more activism, greater art, or has it just been too challenging?
One of the things that's happened with Activist Songbook is that instead of doing live performances, of course, we started to have to make these virtual choir videos, which you saw. The Survival is Resistance was an example of that. But because we're virtual, something that a connection between the activists who initially inspired the song, like the organizer Cao Kui, who's a Hmong artist and activist based in Philadelphia. We were thinking that connection to the people who would end up singing her song in New Haven would be virtual. Would be not a real virtual in the sense of through the song, not actually in person. But because we were forced to do this virtual choir, Cal actually was able to join the New Haven based choir and talk about her story, talk about the importance of the song, and then join them in singing the song. And so some of these connections between activists from different places have happened. Like one of Lily and Vincent Chin's descendants, the people who kind of inspired Activist Songbook in general, was able to find out about the piece and join one of our events. So there have been connections across place, which have been fruitful.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cuatro Puntos did a series of cross-Atlantic quarantine concerts, and we recorded, virtually. Did a couple sessions with Ameed over the summer, as well as artists from South Africa and other countries. So Colombia, I believe. So yeah, certainly sort of forced us to reach out in ways that maybe we would not have done otherwise.
Yeah. Well, in terms of our time for this conversation, we're really at a closing time. And to close, I want to give everybody the opportunity to share any thoughts with each other, with our audience that's watching, with people who will watch in the future on the restreams and broadcasts of this. If you have a place where you're at that you'd like to share, I'd love to hear for our closing. Ameed, would you like to start us off with the closing? We can sort of go, if we have you on the internet. Might be frozen. Well, if there's anybody else who'd like to jump in.
Well, I'll just say something briefly, because I was inspired by Ameed's story about the young potential Islamic State recruit. And a group like the Islamic State is all about retribution and maybe a good bit about protection. They're working really hard to seem to be a group that is fearsome, and they get a lot of following from people who want to feel like they're protected somewhere in a place that is incredibly unsafe. But if I sort of parlay that into what Aaron taught me about the creative process, I mean, we know that music can serve any sort of purpose, including military ones. But for the most part, retribution is not a particularly creative act. But music is intrinsically creative. But there's a hopefulness in that, and I'm thinking of the ways in which music can advance us.
Ameed, you're back with us, I hope. We're just giving the opportunity for final thoughts, closing thoughts before we wrap up and sign out.
Just to return to Ken's initial, like the duality, the two different quotes that you talked about beginning one of your classes with of music has no discernible effect on political outcomes. I've just in a very small way experienced in New Haven a literal moment in which music affected a political outcome. The Board of Alders was trying to pass a ordinance to create a civilian review board to review police misconduct in New Haven. without subpoena power, so without something that would give it its teeth. And so as part of an action to try to force/encourage the Board of Alders to wait until they could include subpoena power in the bill, me and this New Haven composer, Paul Bryant Hudson, created a song that was taught to a bunch of people right before the meeting. The people, I don't know, were you there, Steve? I don't know.
No. I've seen the video a few times.
Yeah, so a bunch of people, learned this song, sang it to the alders in a way that was simultaneously challenging and inviting, which I think could only be done by music in that moment. And they decided to delay the vote and eventually added the subpoena power to the bill. So that was like a really small example.
There's a question here. It looks like, I'm not sure if there's any political issues with this collaboration. Are there thoughts of how the U.S. election will affect future collaborations, if at all? Anybody wants to end with that last question of if the U.S. election might have an impact on the arts in terms of your activism as artists in the future, what you're expecting in the next term?
I feel like I'm in a holding pattern until the inauguration, right? Like incredible joy the last few days, mixed with a lot of fear. And it brings me back to my grandparents who were forced to migrate, and like we don't know what's going to happen. But life continues.
Yeah, I think we learned that there are two Americas, deeply divided. And I found it interesting that among those people who voted for Donald Trump, 89% said that if Biden is elected, he would do lasting damage to America. And among people who voted for Joe Biden, 90% said if Trump was reelected, he would do lasting damage to America. So the musicians are definitely on the front lines now. The events will come fast. The musical response is equally different.
Well, thank you all. I want to close us out on a thought. Aaron, you really gave me this, your comment right before the political question about this political moment that happened that I saw on video, heard about, know people who were there, of singing that alders really inviting in and using song. And it was the true, if you can watch the video, I'll post a link, but it really exposes the grassroots way that arts can be a political tool. And I really feel the political tensions in this country right now are so great that it makes me think, and Ameed, what you showed was that the governments and politics, there's very large forces that's hard for us as individuals to really feel like we have power against. But when we sing together, we come together, the power of music together really does, I think, lift us to the heights of being able to have some energy, have some connection. And so without you as artists, Ken, you writing books and teaching young students, and I can say myself for bringing us together and performing art centers, I think it really is the work in which our communities grow and make really quantum leaps. We make quantum leaps in our neighborhoods when we can get together. So the next opportunity to join the Autorino Center for the Arts here at Cuatro Puntos, play music from the Soviet era of dissidents to the Middle East, from music from, I believe it's from the Curve. And then we will also be playing Jesse Montgomery's music from the US contemporary music. So it's all music and musicians on the front lines. really trying our best to bring us together to be the best people that we can be, take these leaps forward in solidarity for justice, for equity. And thank you all for being here today. Go to
Thanks so much, Steve.
USA.edu. Okay, bye-bye.